Okay, so this time I wanted to do something a little bit different and actually take a look at a couple of demos, because I don't know if you've noticed, but especially on Steam, demos are making a pretty big comeback, especially for indie developers. And I think that's pretty cool, because I was always sort of sad that, demos were getting less and less popular, because they're just a very nice thing to have. It helps you see if you may like something, it helps you see if something will run on your machine, stuff like that. There are tons of reasons to enjoy demos, but the AAA space has almost all but abandoned the entire scene, effectively, and made demos less and less popular. So I thought it was really cool to see them sort of surging in popularity again with indie developers using them as effectively marketing, because indie devs don't have millions of dollars for marketing projects and things. So if they are to make a demo of their game or like fragment a piece of their game and use it as a demo, then they can just get that in people's hands and people can spread it around by word of mouth, things like that, and that's your marketing. It's a lot different than the AAA version of marketing, but it tends to be pretty effective because it actually gets your game in people's hands and allows them to see what they think of it directly. So I think it's really neat that demos are making a resurgence. If you just go to Steam and type in the word prologue, you'll see what I mean. There are tons and tons of like larger indie games and things now that are basically either carving a piece of the game out as a demo for you to try, or creating a prologue to the actual game, something a little bit before that's almost like a tutorial, and then using that as a demo. So that's pretty cool, and I thought that it would be fun to occasionally make a video to get some eyes on some of those demos, because it helps to get people more interested in some of these projects that they may enjoy. The entire point of these is basically to help market the game in a more organic way, so why not take a look at a couple of them and see what they're like. The first one I'm going to take a look at is called Zoria Age of Shattering, and this is the prologue for it. It is a CRPG, effectively, with a couple of kind of neat bits to it. Like, one thing that I'm kind of in two minds about, but it's sort of neat, is the fact that it's basically like a whole free-form combat system and stuff like that. There's no grid, is what I mean. There aren't like grids or hexes or anything, and all of the movement is done just with a 2 action point system reminiscent of something like XCOM, but without the grid, which is kind of neat. It also can get a little bit annoying at times when you're trying to make your characters walk the maximum amount they possibly can while only taking up 1 action point, and you have to sort of like pixel hunt a little bit to try and make sure that you get the right distance and things, but it's still a pretty neat game. It has sort of a Divinity Original Sin sort of vibe to it, where the world is very, very open, and your encounters in the world are very open and are mostly based on the type of characters that you have in your party and all of that sort of thing. So you can just sort of mess around with the world with your abilities and things and create your own scenarios, and I love Divinity Original Sin. It's one of my favorite games, especially the second one. So seeing that be an obvious inspiration to further games in the genre is pretty neat, and it definitely is an inspiration here. It's definitely nowhere near as polished as something like that, but layer in. But what we have is a very open, hand-designed CRPG that looks like it's going to be pretty promising. The demo, the prologue, of course, only has a short section, but in the full game we're promised things like a base building aspect. I obviously can't really show you how that works because that's not in the demo, but that sounds interesting, being able to, I guess it kind of reminds me of like the first Divinity or like the Baldur's Gate games, for instance, having like a sort of home base that you can upgrade throughout the campaign, and that seems to be what they're going for. There's also quite a variety in character classes. You don't get to create a character or anything in the demo, but of the various characters that you can recruit, and there are promised, of course, to be many more of those throughout the main game, there's actually a pretty good variety in classes. They're not really your standard, like, warrior, rogue, mage sort of trifecta in terms of your fantasy tropes and things. They're a little bit different, and they're pretty neat. You also have something that I always am a huge fan of when it comes to like party-based RPGs, CRPGs especially, in that you have direct control over your party's equipment and things. It isn't like a Dragon Age 2 situation, where your party members have simplified equipment and abilities compared to you, and your main character is the only one that you have such detailed control over. No, in this case, everyone has very detailed stats, ability trees, and equipment, and you can kit all of them out however you want. One of my favorite aspects of the demo, though, was the fact that there are lots of different just sort of niches and little places that you can find that makes it clear that this world is very much hand-designed, and there's like secret weapons and little extra encounters and side quests and stuff just sort of hidden in little nooks all over the place, and if you're good at exploring, then the game will reward you with actually showing you all sorts of new fancy stuff and new side quests and things. And one pretty cool addition to that is the idea that there are tons of little areas that you can't actually get to unless you have a specific member in your party, a specific class. This is very much like a Dungeons and Dragons style of thing, which, I mean, makes sense because CRPGs are very heavily based on pen and paper games, so having some mechanics that sort of call back to that is always cool. And you'll see things like rubble that has to be cleared by a demolitionist, or a statue that has to be activated by like a Templar, or a sort of energy bridge that you can use to access a faraway area if you have a mage in your party, stuff like that. So that makes different areas of the world and various dungeons a little bit more dynamic feeling, because depending on the composition of your party, you'll be able to do and access different parts that allow you to maybe have an easier time of a certain area, or maybe get to a secret area with some sweet loot, or something like that. So that's pretty neat. Giving such a variety in navigation and stuff like that is definitely what reminds me of pen and paper RPGs, you know, having lots of different options in any given dungeon to make sure that different parties will go about it in different ways. And the combat is pretty good, I would say. It's definitely a little bit rough. It needs some serious attention when it comes to making sure you're using the correct amount of resources, like your action points and things, since there are no grid indicators of these sorts of things, so it takes a little bit of getting used to be honest, but I've played other games that used this more free form instead of a grid-based system, and they tend to work pretty well once you get used to them, so I think that this would as well. The combat doesn't seem easy, which I do like. I mean, obviously it starts off fairly easy because you're in a small tutorial area with the very basic enemies, but once you get into the first dungeon in the prologue and beyond, things get a lot more difficult. It actually gets pretty tricky because enemies will actually combine their efforts to attack weak party members and things. The AI actually does use skills together in a way that makes sense. You know, they may target your mage with like a heavy armor rending attack and then follow up with a bunch of physical attacks to take advantage of the amplified damage from less armor and stuff like that, and take care of your highest damage dealer quickly, so you have to actually strategically place people. Another aspect of that is the line of sight system. You actually cannot have your characters, especially ranged characters, just attack whoever they want. Even if they're in range, they have to actually have a direct line of sight to them. Which is kind of interesting because, well, since there's no grid, like an XCOM grid, for instance, that would show you how the line of sight works, that means it's a bit tricky, but also kind of fascinating sometimes to mess with the system. You might have to have your archer in a pretty specific place to make sure they can see the enemies that you want to hit, but at the same time, that means you can use your tanks to actually literally physically block your weaker characters so they can't be hit by ranged attacks. You can just stand in front of them and act as a wall. You don't necessarily even have to use like taunting abilities or big shield abilities or anything if you're just actually blocking them so they can't be seen, which is neat. I mean, that's kind of a bit of an oddly physical aspect to combat in something like this, which is generally not quite so direct. You know, usually you have like a grid-based system, and the cover and all of that is based on dice rolls and numbers and stuff, so having it be so literal, so like you're standing in the way, therefore they can't see them, is unexpected, even though it seems obvious, which is sort of neat, honestly. I think it'll be a pretty interesting game, actually. I think it'll be a lot of fun because the overall world seems to be pretty huge, and it seems to be pretty well designed. At least if all of the areas in the main game follow the same sort of path that the areas in the prologue do, there's a lot to explore. There's a lot of little things to find, little weapons and side quests and little events and all those extra bits on the side that allow you to really explore an area for a long time and continue to find new things. So, and judging by the map screen, the world is going to be pretty huge, so that's also very impressive, and it's promising, I would say. This is definitely a promising game. It's a little bit rough around the edges when it comes to certain aspects of it, like, for instance, as you're seeing right now, the inventory is a little bit cluttered at times. The crafting materials take up a lot of space in your inventory, and there are lots and lots of crafting materials, which is possibly fun because that means there is going to be a fairly detailed looking crafting system, but at the same time, it does mean that your inventory is often just choked with these things. It would kind of be nice to have like a separate tab where they go specifically away from everything else. But yeah, that is the Zoria Prologue. I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on this one, and when it releases later, I will try to bring some coverage of it because I think it'll be a pretty cool CRPG, and you know I love those. Now, the other demo that I was excited to take a look at is the one for Undungeon. This is an action RPG in the vein of something like a Supergiant Games game, one of their ARPGs like Bastion or Transistor. It's somewhat similar in feel to one of those. And it is really strange in ways that I really appreciate. It's super cool, actually, and I had a lot of fun during the demo just sort of messing around in the world and just sort of wandering around for random battles and stuff. It's very neat. It's very odd in terms of its overall world design. You are not a human character or anything. You are a sort of other dimensional being that is on Earth, but it is Earth where there has been some sort of shift where multiple dimensions, different versions of Earth have all collided at once, and you have like 8 separate dimensions on this one planet that sort of switch back and forth, and you're even able to discover other dimensions and go to them and actually have them affect each other, which is pretty neat. In the demo, you only have access to the Q dimension, which is like a sort of desert wasteland. And there are promised to be many others, and in fact, in the in-game warp menu, you can actually see the other dimensions that you'll be able to go to. There are a lot of them, and it's promised that they will indeed affect each other. So the example given on the store page is that if you, say, do a quest that destroys a forest at one point, and you go to that same place later on in a different area, then it will be like a big wasteland because you destroyed it earlier in the timeline, and that allows you to sort of affect the world, and probably will have some like story consequences and things, I assume, as you go through and make these decisions in quests, maybe even some side quests allow you to affect things of that nature, so that should be really cool. But the overall game as it stands in the demo is an action RPG that has quite a focus on character abilities in combat. You have different pieces of equipment that you can slot into different, slots, and these will give you all sorts of various abilities to use. The cool part about this is, generally speaking, every one of them has a normal and a charged use. So basically every equipment slot is actually 2 separate skills, depending on if you're just tapping the button or holding it to charge it. The couple that I've found are things like claws. There are lots of different versions of claws. The claws that I'm currently using involve a basic 3-hit swipe, with the third swipe expending a lot of stamina but doing a lot more damage, and the ability to use a sort of ground pound if you charge them that will do a pretty good amount of damage to whatever you hit, as well as mark other enemies around you with this red mark that makes your hits against them guaranteed crits and also steal life from them, which is pretty sweet. You also have things like a shield that allows you to absorb 1 hit of damage. It doesn't matter what the damage is or what the source is or how much it is, it just allows you to basically be invulnerable for a single hit. And then it also allows you to charge the shield in order to actually lay like a spiky mine that is then triggered over time or by doing some damage to it. And you can kind of see the combination there is to give yourself the invulnerability, charge up the mine, and then use it as soon as it spawns, just smack it right in front of you in order to actually hit everything around you, and you will be invulnerable for that hit, so you'll be okay, and then everything around you will get spiked. And the cool thing about the tutorial pop-ups in this game is that they actually not only explain what both of the functions of any individual item does, but actually tells you what the combo is and how you're sort of supposed to use them together, which is neat. That's a nice little bit of game design, actually telling you how they go together, what their synergy is supposed to be, and giving you an example of how to use them together in a way that's really effective. The full game is also going to have multiple characters, which is pretty exciting because the overall equipment and ability variety for even just this one character seems pretty high, so having a couple more than likely each with their own abilities and things as well, should be pretty fascinating when it comes to actually exploring this world. And the thing about this world is it's really strange and alien. It is Earth, but it is Earth in a very unrecognizable series of ways. So you have all sorts of weird creatures and strange people and nomads and all sorts of things like that. And that definitely makes me excited to see what the other dimensions are going to be like and what their denizens are going to be, because I'm sure there's going to be some other very alien people when it comes to the other dimensions as well. Like in the desert one here, you have these kind of weird nomads. Really, the game almost has like a cyberpunk feel to it a little bit. It's like a dark fantasy cyberpunk kind of thing, sort of, in terms of the overall feel, kind of like Shadowrun, I suppose, but a little less like hard cyberpunk than Shadowrun is. And in fact, one of the other more like cyberpunk feeling elements is the upgrade system. This actually allows you to go into a menu and see all of your characters' like organs, basically, and you can then use drops from enemies and other materials and the like that you found in the world to craft upgraded organs and parts of your body to actually improve yourself, which is definitely very cyberpunk, only instead of like transhumanism, you're not even human in the first place, and you're like a strange extra-dimensional being that is like giving themselves a mechanical heart and some sort of like weird alien brain and stuff like that. It's a really neat concept, actually, being able to like heavily alter your character, and I'm assuming they'll alter your character's looks as well when it comes to some of the more outwardly facing ones. Obviously, like having a different heart isn't something that you'd be able to see, but some of the other upgrades, I have a feeling, may actually change your appearance a little bit. And in fact, some of them not only give you vastly different stats and will very much contribute to a very different kind of build than others, but some of them also give you extra skills, abilities that you wouldn't have otherwise. So it'll be, I have a feeling in the final version of the game, a pretty necessary system to actually gaining in a lot of power, since the amount of stuff that you get for actually upgrading yourself is very significant. They aren't just like small level up, stat up kind of things. They're a pretty large difference in how your character will actually work, so that's cool. There's also a bit of a focus on consumables in this game, I've noticed, and in fact there are some very odd ways that consumables work that make it pretty intriguing. You have bombs, throwing weapons, usually knives, needles, things like that, and healing items. And these don't all exactly work like you would think. The throwing items probably work as you would think. They have a nice forward arc, and if you are able to actually hit something, you have a good chance of being able to retrieve the throwing item after combat is over, or sometimes even during combat, depending on if it bounced off of something or if it like embedded itself in an enemy or whatever. And these tend to be pretty powerful. Honestly, they're actually a lot more powerful than some of your basic attacks, so they're very useful to have around, especially for some of the tougher, like ranged enemy ambushes and the like. So that's pretty cool. But also you have these grenades, these bombs, various kinds of bombs, from like just normal anti-personnel grenades that are very satisfying to use but take a second to go off, to things like plants, like bulbs from plants that actually have like an incendiary explosive quality that you can toss around into groups. And the other thing, though, the consumable healing items work in a kind of a strange way that's pretty neat. Instead of just like drinking a potion or using some sort of healing fruit or something, you actually place the item in front of you and you have to smack it to use it. The thing about this is, as soon as you place the item in front of you, it becomes like a physical item in the world, and enemies can also hit it. And even if it's your item that you placed, if an enemy hits it before you, they get the heal and you don't. And it actually works the other way around as well. When enemies want to heal, they don't like chug a potion, they set out a fruit or whatever it is that they have and try to smack it. And if you're quick enough, you can like say throw a knife at it from far away and get like a clutch heal or take that heal away from them. That's a really cool system. I've actually never seen healing in a game done that way. The closest thing I can think of are the healing fruit that you can grow in Unreal. It's actually a little bit like that, if anyone remembers that. And in fact, there are a lot of the consumables are fruit, or like vegetables, or just various like alien plant life, which is sort of neat. And you can in fact find different places in the ground where you can grow consumables. And if you have the purple stuff up there, that essence, which you get from killing enemies, you can just walk over these bits on the ground and use an essence to sort of plant something. And then after a short period of time, something random will grow there and you'll get a consumable, whether it's like an explosive bulb to throw or healing fruit or whatever. There are tons of little interactions with the environment that allow you to sort of grow your own consumables, which is a really neat feature, honestly, that's unusual, definitely. And the fact that there are so many different varieties of them, and the fact that this consumable system works in a very strange way, definitely adds a lot of personality to the combat of the game, because you're always going to be on the lookout for enemies trying to heal, or for making sure that you have a safe area to heal that isn't going to get stolen by an enemy, and things like that. And I have a feeling that this could work in very fascinating ways when it comes to boss fights, and I'm kind of excited to see how that'll turn out. So yeah, you could say that I'm definitely on board for Undungeon now that I've played the demo. I didn't really know much about it at all before the demo, and now that I've played it, I am definitely super on board and very excited to see where it goes. This won't be releasing until, I believe, autumn of this year, so it'll be a little bit before it comes out, but I will definitely, most definitely, try to bring you something, a video at least, on this game when it does, because I am thoroughly interested. I'm very hooked to whatever this game is going to be. I think it's going to be very different, and the overall world exploration and the whole multi-dimensional traversing and all the various characters and things, it's all such a really cool package of like an action RPG that I'm not going to be able to stay away. So I'm definitely excited for this one, and there you go. That's the effect of demos. That's the effect that they can have. That's the intended idea, to give people a tantalizing taste of something that they might be interested in. So if you would like to try either of these demos, the links to both of them will be in the description below this video. And like I said, I'll try to bring you more on these games when they actually release later. If you liked this idea, this whole idea of covering a couple of demos to get people interested in something different, something neat, then let me know. I have a feeling that I'll try to do more of these occasionally, especially in like a double or triple feature format, so I can cover more than one. Since demos are usually fairly small, it would be nice to, be able to have several to talk about at once. But yeah, that's my first foray into this whole idea of talking about some demos. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.